Hi, welcome to Tip Tuesday. My name is Ben Sykes. Glad to have you. So I thought we'd look at an option that we have in Profile Manager today to help you compare user location settings. Say if you have something that seems off between your various locations and you've gotten some complaints and you suspect there's some settings that are wrong, but you would have no idea how to maybe dive into the database and investigate this. You don't want to write any SQL. There's a nice option that we have in Profile Manager for tracking this down. So the user location settings that I have in mind, the most obvious way to edit those are from the main screen, Edit User Location Settings. You can also do that, as you probably know, from Profile Manager. If you're an admin, you can go in and set these up on a global level, and you can set up the defaults that should be true whenever you add a new user into the system, or you can permanently link certain settings back system-wide, and that would block a user from ever modifying those. But maybe there's scenarios where you don't want to necessarily block them from ever changing this. You want them to have the freedom to maybe make an exception on a particular setting, but maybe they've not been responsible and ever changed these back, or you're just curious if some of these settings that have been rolled out in the past still are consistent. And so there is a way for you to compare some of these settings. So real quick before I dive in here, we have user location settings, we have the system-wide location settings, we also have these system-wide global settings that are true just for read-only users. And there are a couple other varieties too, but I won't get into the details. You can actually right mouse click in the profile grid here and set up the same kind of defaults that are specific to profiles, but that's kind of a legacy option. It plays against if you have a default user set up in the system, then the default user would take precedence over this. So profile-based defaults are kind of uncommon. And there's a final variety of this called vendor location preferences, and that's really only needed if you've a very large enterprise and maybe you have a large number of business centers that are all set up in IndySoft, and each one of those business centers needs to have a different slate of locations that would be available in the user locations dialog. And you've got a listing of employees, multiple employees, maybe hundreds of different employees that are associated with various different companies, and so you don't want to merge all those lists together. So contact IndySoft support if you're curious about that. This would be a way for you to target some of those user location settings drop-downs. But the real dialogue I want to point you towards is the way you can compare some of these settings and clean these up. So go to Compare Preferences here. So this gives you a way to review these settings regardless of how they were input into the system. Maybe they were input from a particular user location settings dialog on the user level, or maybe they were set up on a global level and you're curious how all this stuff mixes in. Maybe you want to make sure that the global settings that you're pushing out really are consistent with what has been used on the user level in the past. So this will give you a way to compare that. So you can select the different types that you want to compare. So let's leave off the profile-based and the vendor-based for now, since they're much less common. And this just lets you filter by a particular setting and a particular location. Or you could just say all, and you could select across all of them. But let's say maybe in this example, we've had complaints about the default company for procedures not working consistently. And so here we could say, select that particular variable and say Cleveland Repair. We could sort these by value and see if maybe someone has a different setting set up. So in this example, everything looks good, but if something was inconsistent, it would show up just like this. Like if you can see here, if I double click on that grid, it's going to send me right into the right kind of user location settings dialog that I would need to make this correction. So let me actually just go ahead and change this so you can illustrate how it would look different here. So let's say for the procedures, let's switch that to BCD company. So the grid is refreshed here. So now it's giving us an example of how one of these settings would be inconsistent. So you could see Tom, for whatever reason, had this set up, and you could immediately double click on that, go in and make the correction for them. So this dialog lets you make comparisons particular to each variable. So you've got all the different ones that are listed across the various screens. Some of them have more cryptic names behind the scenes, but default company settings, default layouts, highlight current equipment, any of these that you might be familiar with from the user location settings dialog. Or you could say search across all the different variables. It'll put them in the same grid. You can pick a particular location or search across all of them. And then filter in the grid here. And then as soon as you find a setting that you know you want to change, just double click and make the change there. So here in that example, I happen to pick one that exists on the global level. So you can see it popped me into the full client global settings dialog where I can make that correction. All right, hope that was helpful, and I hope you have a great rest of your week. Thanks.